Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that'll make you appreciate GPS navigation, weather forecasts, and the fact that when you're lost, you can just call an Uber instead of potentially sailing off the edge of the world into a sea of monsters while slowly starving to death on hardtack bread that could double as building material. We're talking about waking up on Christopher Columbus's ship in 1492, a year when the greatest navigation technology was point the boat toward where you think land might be, and pray to God you don't fall off the edge of the world. You're about to experience the ultimate maritime adventure with a crew that includes religious fanatics, desperate criminals, and professional sailors who think scurvy is just a fact of life. So before you get comfortable in your climate-controlled room with instant access to global communication and unlimited streaming entertainment, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. A world where we can communicate instantly without having to send messages via ship that might take months to arrive, assuming the ship doesn't sink or get eaten by sea monsters. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. You close your eyes tonight after checking your phone's weather app, GPS location, and probably complaining about slow internet or delayed flights. But when you open them again, you're not in your comfortable bed, you're swaying in a rope hammock that smells like tar, fish, and the collective body odor of men who consider weekly bathing a luxury for rich people. But here's where things get really terrifying. You're not just on any ship. You're on the Santa Maria, flagship of a 3-ship expedition led by a man who has convinced the Spanish crown to fund his plan to reach Asia by sailing west into an ocean that most educated people believe either goes on forever or ends in a waterfall that drops into hell. Your morning routine now includes checking if the ship is still floating, if anyone died during the night, and whether today is the day you discover that the world is flat and you're about to sail off the edge, where your survival depends on the navigation skills of a man using maps that are mostly educated guesses, where your food consists of whatever hasn't rotted yet in the ship's hold, and where your biggest worry isn't running out of phone battery, it's running out of fresh water while surrounded by an infinite ocean that no European has ever successfully crossed. And trust me, by the time this journey is over, you'll either discover a new world or become fish food in the most historically significant maritime disaster never recorded. The first sensation that hits you isn't the smell of unwashed sailors or the sound of creaking wood. It's the relentless, nauseating motion of a ship that's apparently trying to rock you to death. Your bed is a rope hammock suspended between wooden beams, swaying with the rhythm of ocean waves in a way that makes your inner ear declare war on your stomach. The hammock itself is a medieval torture device disguised as sleeping equipment. It's made from rough hemp rope that leaves grid patterns on your skin, sized for someone about a foot shorter than you, and shared with previous occupants who may or may not still be alive. The mattress is whatever clothing or rags you can stuff into the rope mesh to create something resembling padding. Your attempts to get out of the hammock reveal that maritime sleeping requires skills they don't teach in modern life. The ship's constant motion means timing your exit wrong results in being thrown across the deck, into wooden barrels, or directly into other sleeping sailors who don't appreciate being awakened by flying human projectiles. And that's when you realize this isn't just any ship. This is a 15th century Spanish expedition vessel, where comfort was never part of the design specifications. The sleeping quarters, using the term very loosely, accommodate roughly 30 men in a space the size of a modern apartment bedroom. Privacy doesn't exist, personal space is measured in inches, and the concept of individual sleeping areas is as foreign as the lands you're apparently sailing to discover. Your hammock neighbors include a mix of professional sailors, religious converts, convicted criminals working off their sentences, and adventurers seeking fortune in unknown lands. None of them seem particularly concerned about the fact that you've apparently joined their expedition without any memory of how you got here. The ship's motion is unlike anything in your modern experience. This isn't the steady vibration of a modern cruise ship with stabilizers and engineering designed for passenger comfort. This is a wooden vessel that responds to every wave, wind gust, and ocean current, like a cork bobbing in a bathtub operated by a hyperactive child. As you finally extract yourself from the hammock without breaking any bones, you come face to face with your new shipmates, and it becomes immediately clear that this isn't a pleasure cruise. The crew of the Santa Maria represents what can charitably be described described as the bottom tier of Spanish society, plus a few people who were probably running from something when they volunteered for a voyage into the unknown. Your first crew interaction is with Miguel, a gap-toothed sailor who appears to have been awake for approximately 3 days straight, and smells like he's been marinating in a mixture of seawater, wine and existential despair. He greets you with a string of Spanish profanity that roughly translates to "About time you woke up, we thought you were dead." The crew's reaction to your obvious confusion suggests that either they're used to people joining expeditions without clear memories of how they got there, or your arrival is so unremarkable that they've already forgotten to be surprised by mysterious new crew members appearing in their sleeping quarters. But the really unsettling part is that everyone assumes you belong here, even though you obviously don't. Miguel explains, in a mixture of Spanish and gestures, that you signed on as crew in Palos 3 weeks ago, took the king's advance payment, and promptly spent the next 2 weeks drunk in various taverns before somehow making it aboard ship before departure. This explanation accounts for your memory gaps while establishing that you're now legally obligated to complete the voyage regardless of your personal preferences. The crew includes men from various Spanish regions, a few Portuguese sailors, some Italian navigators, and what appears to be at least one person who might be Arabic or North African. It's a multicultural expedition united by the common goals of not starving to death, and possibly getting rich if they survive whatever Columbus has planned. Your attempts to explain that you don't remember signing anything are met with sympathetic nods and stories about other crew members who've had similar post-drinking memory issues. Apparently, alcohol-induced amnesia is a common occupational hazard among 15th century sailors. The social hierarchy on board includes experienced seamen who know how ships work, religious personnel who know how prayers work, and various other specialists who know how specific aspects of long-distance sailing work. You apparently are none of these things. Your confusion about your situation deepens when you realize that Columbus's expedition consists of 3 ships, and you need to figure out which one you're on before you embarrass yourself further. The ships have different crews, different captains, and different levels of seaworthiness that could affect your survival chances. Looking around the ship structure and asking careful questions reveals that you're on the Santa Maria, Columbus's flagship and the largest ship in the expedition. This is both good news and potentially bad news. The Santa Maria is what the Spanish call a nao, a medium-sized cargo ship that's been adapted for long-distance exploration. It's roughly 85 feet long, built for carrying supplies rather than speed, and designed by people who had no idea they were creating a vessel that would need to cross an entire ocean that European maps insist doesn't exist. But understanding the ship's specifications reveals just how insane this expedition really is. Your floating home for the foreseeable future was built for Mediterranean coastal trading, not transoceanic exploration. The ship's design assumes access to regular ports for resupply, repair and navigation updates. Instead, you're heading into an ocean that European maps show as either empty space or filled with sea monsters, depending on the cartographer's imagination. The expedition's other ships, the Nina and the Pinta, are smaller, faster caravels that serve as scouts and backup vessels. If the Santa Maria encounters problems, those ships are supposed to help, but they're also small enough that their assistance might be limited to watching you sink while taking notes for the survivor's report. Your ship status means you're serving under Columbus directly, which provides access to information about the expedition's goals and progress, but also makes you a participant in what might be the most ambitious navigation experiment in human history. Columbus is either a genius who's about to change the world, or a delusional fanatic who's about to kill everyone through spectacular miscalculation. The crew's attitude toward their ship assignment ranges from pride to concern to resignation. Your own attitude is still forming as you process the reality of your situation. Your first encounter with Christopher Columbus happens when you're called to the ship's stern castle for what appears to be a routine crew inspection, and you find yourself face to face with one of history's most controversial figures. Columbus is shorter than you expected, more intense than you imagined, and absolutely convinced that he's about to accomplish something that will change the world forever. The Admiral, as he insists on being called, examines each crew member with the focused attention of someone whose reputation and possibly his life depend on choosing the right people for an expedition that most experts consider suicidal. His evaluation of you involves questions about your sailing experience, your religious devotion, and your willingness to follow orders even when those orders seem to contradict common sense. Columbus speaks with the confidence of someone who has spent years convincing skeptical authorities to fund his expedition, combined with the desperation of someone who understands that failure means death, disgrace and the end of any hopes for historical significance. He's charismatic, intelligent and possibly completely insane, But what strikes you most about Columbus is his absolute certainty about facts that seem questionable. The admiral explains the expedition's goals with the enthusiasm of someone describing a simple business trip rather than an unprecedented voyage into unknown waters. According to his calculations, the Western Ocean is much smaller than classical authorities claimed. Asia is much closer than ancient maps suggest, and this expedition will reach the Indies in approximately 5 weeks. His confidence is based on his own mathematical calculations, his interpretation of classical geographical texts, and what he claims are divine revelations that have provided him with special knowledge about world geography. These sources have convinced him that the established scholarly consensus about ocean distances is completely wrong. Your modern knowledge of world geography makes Columbus's calculations seem obviously incorrect, but you're also aware that his mistakes will accidentally lead to one of the most significant discoveries in human history. The irony of being on a ship captained by someone who's wrong about almost everything but will succeed anyway creates cognitive dissonance that makes conversation challenging. Columbus's questions about your background reveal that he's particularly interested in crew members who demonstrate loyalty, religious faith, and willingness to continue sailing even when circumstances become desperate. These qualifications suggest he's anticipating challenges that go beyond normal maritime difficulty. Columbus's explanation of the expedition's destination involved geographical theories that would be hilarious if they weren't being used to navigate an actual ship carrying real people across an ocean that could kill everyone if the theories prove incorrect. According to the admiral, you're on your way to India, China, and various Asian kingdoms that are conveniently located just a few weeks west of Spain. The admiral shows you maps and calculations that demonstrate how the western route to Asia is not only possible but actually more efficient than the traditional eastern routes controlled by Ottoman and Italian merchants. His presentation includes citations from classical authorities, biblical references, and mathematical proofs that make his argument seem scholarly and authoritative. Columbus's geographical reasoning involves creative interpretations of ancient texts, selective use of measurement systems, and assumptions about ocean sizes that reduce the Atlantic to roughly the dimensions of the Mediterranean. His calculations require ignoring most established authorities while trusting sources that support his preferred conclusions. Here's where you realize that Columbus's expedition is based on geographical theories that are completely wrong but historically necessary. The admiral genuinely believes that sailing west from Spain will bring the expedition to the eastern shores of Asia within 5 to 6 weeks. His miscalculations about Earth's size, ocean distances, and continental distribution are enormous, but they're also the mistakes that will accidentally lead to European contact with the Americans. Your attempts to ask questions about alternative possibilities, what if the ocean is larger than calculated, what if there are unexpected lands in the way, what if the journey takes longer than planned, are met with explanations about why such scenarios are impossible according to the best available geographical knowledge. The crew's reaction to Columbus's geographical briefings ranges from enthusiastic belief to polite skepticism to quiet resignation. Some sailors are genuinely excited about reaching Asia and establishing trade relationships that could make them wealthy. Others seem more focused on surviving the journey regardless of its ultimate destination. Your modern understanding of geography creates an ethical dilemma about whether to share knowledge that could save lives but would also prevent one of history's most important discoveries from occurring. Do you maintain historical integrity, or try to save people from decisions based on incorrect information? The political and religious context of Columbus's expedition becomes clear when the admiral explains the royal mandate that authorized the voyage and the specific objectives that Queen Isabella expects the expedition to accomplish. This isn't just a commercial venture, it's a religious and political mission that carries the authority of the Spanish crown and the Catholic Church. Queen Isabella's instructions include establishing trade relationships with Asian rulers, spreading Christianity to non-European populations, and securing Spanish territorial claims to any lands discovered during the voyage. The expedition operates under royal authority that makes Columbus a representative of Spanish political and religious power in whatever territories he encounters. The financial backing for the expedition represents a significant royal investment that Isabella expects to produce returns through trade opportunities, territorial expansion, and religious conversion. The Queen's support makes the voyage possible, but it also creates pressure to produce results that justify the expense and risk involved. But the royal mandate also includes objectives that reveal the expedition's true significance. The instructions authorize Columbus to serve as admiral of the ocean sea and governor of any lands discovered during the voyage, providing him with political authority to establish Spanish rule over new territory. These powers assume that the expedition will encounter lands that can be conquered and governed according to Spanish law. Religious objectives include converting indigenous populations to Christianity and establishing Spanish ecclesiastical authority over new territory. The expedition carries religious personnel and sacred objects designed to support missionary activities in whatever lands the voyage discovers. Your modern understanding of indigenous rights, religious freedom and colonial exploitation makes the royal mandate deeply troubling, but you're also aware that these instructions reflect standard European thinking about exploration, conquest and cultural superiority that characterized the late 15th century. The crew's understanding of their mission varies depending on their education and social background. Some sailors focus on potential wealth from trade and treasure, others emphasize religious obligations to spread Christianity, and many simply concentrate on surviving the voyage regardless of its larger significance. The royal authority backing the expedition provides legal justification for actions that would otherwise be considered piracy, kidnapping or unauthorized territorial claims, but it also creates expectations for success that could have serious consequences if the voyage fails to meet royal objectives. Your introduction to 15th century maritime sanitation reveals that the concept of shipboard bathrooms simply doesn't exist, and the solution to this basic human need is both terrifying and environmentally problematic. The ship's head consists of a wooden platform with holes cut in it, suspended over the ocean at the ship's bow, where natural biological functions meet the laws of gravity and ocean currents. Using the facilities requires climbing onto a platform that extends beyond the ship's safety while the vessel pitches and rolls in ocean swells that could easily wash you overboard if you lose your grip or time your visit poorly. The experience combines the challenges of maintaining balance, preserving modesty and avoiding accidental maritime suicide, all while addressing urgent physiological needs. The lack of toilet paper is resolved through a community rope that hangs in the ocean, shared by all crew members, and cleaned by the same seawater that surrounds your food supply, drinking water source, and bathing facilities. Hygiene standards are best described as whatever doesn't immediately kill you is probably acceptable. But the bathroom situation is actually more complex and dangerous than simple inconvenience. Using the head during storms, rough seas, or high winds creates genuine survival challenges that require careful timing, physical strength, and considerable courage. Many sailors simply avoid the facilities during dangerous weather, leading to alternative arrangements that significantly impact the ship's already challenging aromatic environment. Privacy is a concept that doesn't apply to maritime sanitation, since the head accommodates multiple users simultaneously while providing clear views for anyone else on deck. Personal modesty becomes a luxury that's quickly abandoned in favor of practicality and basic survival needs. The psychological adjustment to community bathroom facilities shared with 30 other men, suspended over an ocean that wants to kill you, while wearing the only clothes you own, creates mental challenges that modern life doesn't prepare you for. Your bathroom routine now includes risk assessment, weather evaluation, and prayers for survival. Medical considerations include the reality that digestive problems, seasickness, and dietary issues must be managed using facilities that are actively dangerous during normal ship operation. Illness doesn't excuse you from the risks involved in basic human function. Hammocks are shared between multiple crew members on rotating schedules that depend on work shifts, watch duties, and a complex social hierarchy that determines who sleeps when and where. Your hammock assignment involves sharing sleeping equipment with Rodrigue, a professional sailor who works the opposite watch schedule and has strong opinions about proper hammock maintenance, acceptable noise levels during sleep hours, and the appropriate way to share limited bedding materials in a maritime environment. The rotation system means that hammocks are never completely empty or completely private, since someone is always either preparing to sleep, currently sleeping, or recently finished sleeping in the same equipment you're expected to use. Warmth, cleanliness, and comfort are communal resources rather than individual privileges. Here's where 15th century maritime socialism reveals its practical challenges and social complexity. Hammock sharing disputes involve negotiations about sleeping schedules, bedding arrangements, personal belongings, storage, and behavioral standards that affect other people's rest. These agreements are enforced through crew social pressure rather than official regulation. The physical intimacy of shared sleeping equipment creates social relationships that modern people would find uncomfortable, but that maritime life makes necessary for survival. Personal boundaries must be constantly negotiated and maintained within the constraints of limited space and equipment. Sleep quality depends not just on your own comfort, but on the sleeping habits, personal hygiene, and schedule adherence of your hammock partner. Snoring, restless movement, and irregular schedule changes can affect multiple people's rest, and consequently, their ability to perform dangerous maritime work. Your modern expectations about individual sleeping space, personal belongings, security, and privacy during rest create social conflicts with crew members who have never experienced individual bedrooms and consider shared sleeping arrangements normal and efficient. The ship's ecosystem includes a thriving population of rats, mice, insects and various other creatures that have established permanent residence in the vessel's structure and consider human crew members to be temporary guests in their maritime habitat. Your living situation now includes involuntary roommates who outnumber the human crew and have significantly better knowledge of the ship's layout. The rat population serves important ecological functions by consuming food scraps, controlling other insect populations, and providing early warning systems for ship problems through their behavioral changes. However, they also compete with human crew for food resources, spread diseases, and create sanitation challenges that compound existing health risks. Flea and lice populations treat human crew members as mobile housing units that provide warmth, food sources and transportation between different areas of the ship. Personal hygiene becomes a constant battle against insects that reproduce faster than they can be eliminated, and that have evolved specifically to exploit human hosts. But the ship's pest situation is more than just inconvenience. It represents serious health and safety threats. Rats can damage crucial ship supplies, navigation equipment and structural materials that the crew depends on for survival. Their population must be controlled through methods that don't compromise food safety or ship operations while maintaining some level of coexistence with creatures that serve useful ecological functions. Disease transmission through pest populations includes typhus, plague, and various parasitic infections that can spread rapidly through crews living in close quarters with limited medical resources. The health risks from pest cohabitation often exceed the dangers from ocean storms and navigation errors. Food storage requires constant vigilance against creatures that can access any inadequately protected supplies and that reproduce fast enough to consume significant portions of expedition rations. Pest control becomes a survival necessity rather than a comfort preference. Your modern understanding of disease transmission, pest control, and sanitation standards makes the ship's ecosystem seem obviously dangerous, but medieval people lack knowledge about bacteria, parasites and disease vectors that would make effective pest management possible. Coexistence with vermin is considered normal rather than problematic. The psychological adaptation to sharing your living space with creatures that crawl on you while you sleep, contaminate your food while you eat, and compete with you for resources while you work, creates mental stress that compounds the physical challenges of maritime survival. Your introduction to maritime cuisine begins with hardtack, the primary bread substitute that will sustain you for the duration of the voyage, and you quickly discover that calling this substance bread is an insult to bakers throughout human history. Hardtack is essentially flour and water baked into rectangular tiles that could probably be used as armor plating if the ship comes under attack. The preparation process for consuming hardtack involves soaking it in whatever liquid is available, water, wine, or soup, until it reaches a consistency that human teeth can theoretically penetrate without breaking. Even after extensive soaking, eating hardtack requires jaw muscles that most modern people haven't developed, and dental work that can withstand impacts that would crack normal teeth. Your first attempt to eat dry hardtack nearly results in dental emergency when you realize that biting directly into this maritime concrete substitute could literally break your teeth or dislocate your jaw. The crew's amusement at your struggles suggests that hardtack consumption is a learned skill that separates experienced sailors from landlubbers. But hardtack represents more than just challenging food. It's a preservation technology that enables long-distance maritime travel. The rock-hard consistency that makes hardtack difficult to eat also makes it resistant to spoilage, pest damage, and moisture that would destroy normal bread within days of departure. Hardtack can remain edible for months or even years when properly stored in dry conditions. The nutritional value of hardtack is basically limited to calories and whatever nutrients can be extracted from flour and water. It provides energy for physical work, but lacks vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients necessary for long-term health. Extended hardtack consumption leads to nutritional deficiencies that manifest as scurvy, weakness, and various health problems. Your modern dietary expectations about bread that tastes good, provides balanced nutrition, and doesn't require special preparation techniques clash dramatically with maritime reality, where food preservation takes priority over palatability, nutrition, or ease of consumption. The social aspects of hardtack consumption include communal soaking procedures, sharing of softening liquids, and group discussions about techniques for making this maritime concrete slightly more edible. Hardtack becomes a shared challenge that bonds crew members through common suffering. The protein portion of your maritime diet consists of heavily salted meat and fish that have been preserved through methods designed to prevent complete spoilage rather than maintain flavor, texture, or nutritional value. Your protein options range from barely edible to definitely shouldn't eat that, but might not have a choice. Salt-preserved meat requires extensive preparation to remove enough salt to make it consumable, while retaining enough preservation to prevent immediate spoilage. The desalting process involves soaking meat in precious fresh water supplies, creating difficult decisions about water allocation between drinking, cooking, and food preparation needs. The fish preservation process involves salt curing methods that transform fresh fish into something resembling leather jerky that happens to contain protein. Preserved fish provides essential nutrients but tastes like concentrated ocean water mixed with whatever the fish ate before dying, which may have included other dead fish or substances you'd rather not contemplate. Here's where maritime food preservation reveals its fundamental trade-offs between safety and palatability. Salt preservation prevents bacterial spoilage that would make meat and fish deadly to consume, but the preservation process also destroys much of the nutritional value while creating foods that are almost inedible without extensive preparation and strong stomach. The quality of preserved protein varies significantly depending on preservation methods, storage conditions, and time since preparation. Early voyage preserved foods are merely unpalatable, while late voyage preserved foods may be actively dangerous despite preservation efforts. Fresh protein sources become available only when the crew can successfully catch fish or encounter land-based hunting opportunities. Fresh food is precious, limited, and distributed according to ship hierarchy that prioritizes officers and essential crew members over ordinary sailors. Your modern food safety standards and palatability expectations create psychological barriers to consuming foods that look, smell, and taste like they've already begun decomposing. However, refusing to eat available protein could lead to malnutrition that makes survival impossible. The ship's water supply represents the most critical resource limitation that affects every aspect of life aboard the vessel, and you quickly discover that fresh water is more precious than gold when you're surrounded by an ocean you can't drink. Water rationing affects not just drinking but cooking, cleaning, and basic hygiene in ways that compound all the other challenges of maritime life. Freshwater storage technology in 1492 involves wooden barrels that are susceptible to leakage, contamination, and spoilage that can render water supplies undrinkable within weeks of departure. Water conservation requires careful management of limited supplies while accepting degradation in water quality that modern people would consider unacceptable. Wine serves as both beverage and water substitute because alcohol content provides some protection against bacterial contamination that affects stored water supply. Wine consumption isn't recreational, it's a medical necessity for staying hydrated with liquids that won't cause immediate illness through contamination. But the water situation creates daily survival challenges that affect every aspect of ship life. Water rationing means that each crew member receives a daily allocation that must cover drinking, food preparation, and whatever cleaning is possible within severe limitations. Personal hygiene becomes a luxury that competes with survival needs for scarce water resources. Water quality deteriorates throughout the voyage as storage containers develop leaks, contamination, and algae growth that makes fresh water increasingly unpalatable and potentially dangerous. Crew members must choose between dehydration and consuming water that may cause illness. The psychological stress of constant thirst while surrounded by undrinkable ocean water creates mental challenges that affect judgment, mood, and decision-making abilities. Water anxiety becomes a constant background stress that influences all other aspects of maritime survival. Your modern assumptions about unlimited clean water access clash dramatically with maritime reality, where water scarcity affects every daily decision and where dehydration is a constant threat despite being surrounded by more water than you've ever seen. Your introduction to serious ocean weather comes when the ship encounters its first major wave system, and you discover that watching maritime movies doesn't prepare you for the reality of being inside a wooden box that's being thrown around by forces that could easily kill everyone aboard. The ocean transforms from scenic background to active threat as waves large enough to hide other ships begin testing your vessel's structural integrity and your personal relationship with gravity. The ship's motion during heavy seas involves complex three-dimensional movements that affect every aspect of life aboard the vessel. Forward and backward motion combines with side-to-side rolling and vertical pitching to create motion patterns that make normal activities impossible. while triggering physiological responses that modern people rarely experience. Your first encounter with waves large enough to lift the entire ship and then drop it into troughs between swells provides immediate education about why experienced sailors develop sea legs and why maritime travel was considered inherently dangerous. The ship doesn't just ride over waves, it climbs them like hills and then slides down the other side while everything inside shifts according to physics rather than convenience. Here's where you realize that ocean storms are fundamentally different from any weather you've experienced on land. Wave heights during oceanic storms can exceed the length of your ship, creating situations where the vessel is literally inside valleys of water that block views of the horizon while walls of water tower overhead. The psychological impact of being inside what amounts to temporary underwater canyons creates terror that affects decision-making and survival instincts. The ship's wooden construction means that heavy seas create sounds, creaking, groaning, and various impact noises that suggest structural failure might be imminent. Every wave impact produces sounds that could indicate normal ship flex or could signal that the vessel is beginning to break apart under stress. Safety aboard ship during rough weather requires abandoning normal activities and focusing entirely on maintaining physical attachment to secure points while the vessel attempts to throw you overboard through sheer physics. Moving around the ship becomes an extreme sport that could easily result in serious injury or death. Your modern experience with transportation that provides smooth, controlled motion conflicts dramatically with maritime reality, where weather determines whether basic survival is possible, and where nature demonstrates its complete indifference to human comfort or safety. The onset of serious seasickness transforms you from functional crew member to miserable passenger who contributes nothing except additional cleanup problems for people who are also struggling with motion-induced illness. Seasickness affects different people at different rates, but extended rough weather eventually challenges everyone's ability to maintain normal bodily function. Your initial seasickness symptoms progress from mild nausea to uncontrollable vomiting that continues even after your stomach is completely empty, leaving you retching air while your body continues attempting to expel contents that no longer exist. The progression of seasickness follows predictable patterns that experienced sailors recognize but can't effectively prevent or treat. The crew's response to widespread seasickness combines practical necessity with dark humor, as everyone deals with the reality that a significant portion of ship's population is temporarily incapacitated by illness that makes work difficult and living conditions even more challenging than normal. But seasickness creates practical problems that go beyond individual discomfort. Widespread illness affects the ship's ability to maintain essential operations, respond to emergencies, and perform basic maintenance tasks that keep the vessel operational during rough weather. Seasickness reduces effective crew size when maximum manpower is most needed for survival. The cleanup challenges created by widespread vomiting on a ship with limited water supplies and no effective sanitation systems compound existing hygiene problems while creating health hazards that affect everyone regardless of their personal susceptibility to motion sickness. Recovery from severe seasickness can take days even after weather conditions improve, meaning that some crew members remain weakened and less effective long after the immediate motion challenges end. The physical toll of extended seasickness includes dehydration, malnutrition, and exhaustion that accumulate over time. Your competitive seasickness performance compared to experienced sailors provides some measure of your adaptation to maritime conditions, though being less sick than people who've spent years at sea isn't necessarily an achievement worth celebrating given the overall misery levels involved. The development of sea legs, the ability to maintain balance and move effectively on a ship in motion, represents a fundamental adaptation that changes how your body responds to gravity, balance, and spatial orientation. Your brain must learn to anticipate and compensate for motion patterns that don't exist in land-based life. Walking on a ship requires constant adjustment to surface angles that change unpredictably as the vessel responds to wave action, wind pressure, and steering correction. Normal walking techniques that assume stable horizontal surfaces become ineffective and potentially dangerous when applied to maritime environments. Your initial attempts to move around the ship during moderate seas result in collisions with walls, falls onto hard surfaces, and general physical comedy that would be amusing if it weren't potentially fatal when performed near open railings or sharp equipment. Here's where you discover that maritime life requires physical skills that land dwellers never develop. Experienced sailors move with a distinctive gait that incorporates wide stances, flexible knees, and hand placement techniques that provide stability during unpredictable motion. Their movement patterns look awkward on land but become elegant and efficient in maritime environment. The psychological adaptation to unstable surfaces affects confidence, spatial awareness, and willingness to perform complex tasks while the ground beneath you responds to forces beyond your control. Simple activities like eating, sleeping, or working require constant balance adjustments that become become automatic with experience. The transition from sea legs back to land legs when you eventually reach shore involves readjustment challenges that can be as disorienting as the original adaptation to ship life. Your brain becomes calibrated for constant motion and must recalibrate for stable surface. Your modern experience with transportation systems designed for passenger comfort doesn't prepare you for environments where maintaining basic mobility requires specialized skills and constant attention to balance and safety considerations that affect every movement and activity. Your first encounter with 15th century navigation technology reveals that the ship's survival depends entirely on a magnetic compass that points toward magnetic north through principles that no one aboard fully understands. The compass represents the most advanced navigation technology available, but it operates according to invisible forces that medieval people interpret through a combination of practical experience and supernatural explanation. The compass construction involves a magnetized iron needle, floating in oil, or suspended on a pivot point, enclosed in a wooden box that protects the delicate mechanism from ship motion and weather damage. The device appears simple but represents centuries of technological development that enables long-distance navigation without coastal landmarks. Columbus's navigation methods combine compass readings with dead reckoning calculations that estimate position based on speed, direction, and time traveled since the last known position. These calculations accumulate errors over time and distance, making long-distance navigation increasingly uncertain as the voyage progresses. But compass navigation involves complications that could easily lead to fatal errors. Magnetic declination. The difference between magnetic north and true north varies by geographical location in ways that 15th century navigators don't fully understand. Compass readings that are accurate in European waters become increasingly unreliable as the expedition travels into unknown oceanic regions. The ship's iron fittings, weapons, and tools can affect compass accuracy through magnetic interference that causes readings to deviate from true magnetic north. Navigators must compensate for these effects through experience and adjustment techniques that aren't always reliable under challenging conditions. Weather conditions affect compass visibility and accuracy, while ship motion makes precise readings difficult during rough seas when accurate navigation is most important for survival. The navigation system works best under conditions that least commonly exist during oceanic travel. Your modern understanding of magnetic principles, GPS technology, and electronic navigation makes the compass seem primitively simple, but you also recognize that this basic technology enables navigation achievements that would be impossible without some method for determining direction during extended oceanic voyages. Celestial navigation represents the backup system for compass navigation, requiring knowledge of star positions, seasonal variations, and mathematical calculations that most crew members don't possess. Star navigation depends on clear weather, visible horizons, and astronomical knowledge that takes years to develop effectively. Columbus's celestial navigation skills include ability to identify key stars and constellations that indicate direction and approximate latitude, but his calculations involve estimates and approximations rather than precise measurement. His astronomical knowledge comes from classical texts, practical experience, and some mathematical training that may or may not be adequate for transoceanic navigation. The night watch schedule includes navigation duties that require identifying specific stars and maintaining course corrections based on celestial observations when compass readings are uncertain or unavailable. Clear nights provide navigation opportunities, but cloudy weather can leave the expedition blind for days at a time. Here's where medieval astronomy meets practical survival in ways that determine whether everyone lives or dies. Star position knowledge requires understanding seasonal changes, geographical variations, and time-based calculations that account for Earth's rotation and orbital motion. These calculations involve mathematical concepts that push the limits of 15th century educational systems. Weather dependence makes celestial navigation unreliable during storms, cloudy conditions, and rough seas when navigation accuracy is most crucial for avoiding dangerous waters or maintaining course toward desired destinations. The backup navigation system works least well when most needed. Navigation errors accumulated over days or weeks of cloudy weather can result in significant position uncertainty that affects decisions about course corrections, supply management, and landfall expectations. Small errors in celestial navigation can produce large deviations over oceanic distance. Your modern knowledge of astronomy and navigation helps you understand the theoretical principles involved, but practical celestial navigation requires hands-on skills and astronomical knowledge that take years to develop through direct experience under maritime conditions. The growing realization that Columbus's expedition may be seriously lost develops gradually as navigation calculations produce increasingly uncertain results and expected landmarks fail to appear according to schedule. Being lost at sea isn't like missing a highway exit, it's an existential threat that could result in death by starvation, thirst, or simply sailing into oceanic regions from which return is impossible. Columbus's daily navigation briefings become less confident as the voyage progresses beyond the timeframes his calculations predicted for reaching Asian shore. His explanations for delays involve weather conditions, current effects, and measurement adjustments that may indicate navigation errors rather than temporary setbacks. The crew's growing awareness that their position may be uncertain affects morale, decision-making, and confidence in leadership, as sailors begin questioning whether the expedition's navigation is based on accurate knowledge or optimistic speculation that could kill everyone through miscalculation. But being lost at sea in 1492 means confronting possibilities that are genuinely terrifying. The ocean distances involved in transatlantic navigation mean that significant navigation errors could place the expedition beyond the range of safe return to European ports, even if the crew decides to abandon the original mission and attempt to sail home. Food and water supplies are calculated based on estimated voyage duration that assumes accurate navigation and reasonable weather conditions. Extended sailing due to navigation errors could exhaust life-supporting resources before reaching any land that could provide resupply opportunity. The psychological pressure of uncertain navigation affects crew performance, decision-making, and willingness to continue following orders from leaders whose competence is increasingly questionable. Navigation uncertainty breeds doubt about all aspects of expedition leadership and planning. Your modern understanding of global geography provides knowledge about the expedition's actual position and ultimate destination, but sharing this information would require explaining knowledge sources that would seem supernatural or heretical to 15th century thinking while potentially preventing historically important discovery. The combination of extended voyage duration, uncertain navigation, and declining supplies creates mounting pressure among crew members who begin demanding that Columbus abandon the expedition and return to Spain before conditions deteriorate beyond the point of safe return. The turn back faction includes experienced sailors who understand oceanic dangers and recognize warning signs that suggest the expedition is heading toward disaster. The arguments for returning to Spain are compelling and practical. The voyage has already exceeded predicted duration. Food and water supplies are declining faster than anticipated. Weather conditions have been challenging, and no signs of approaching land have appeared despite Columbus's assurances that Asian shores should be visible by now. Daily crew discussions about expedition progress become increasingly heated as sailors calculate remaining supplies against estimated return journey requirements, and conclude that continuing the voyage much longer could make safe return impossible regardless of what lies ahead in unknown waters. But the demand to turn back creates leadership challenges that could destroy expedition unity. Columbus's authority depends on maintaining crew confidence in his navigation abilities and expedition planning, but growing demands for course reversal suggest that many crew members no longer trust his judgment or believe his assurances about reaching Asian destination. The practical arguments for returning become stronger daily as supplies decline and navigation uncertainty increases, but Columbus's royal mandate requires continuing the voyage until Asian contact is established or return becomes absolutely necessary for survival. Crew morale affects work performance, navigation accuracy, and willingness to follow orders during emergency situations when expedition survival depends on coordinated response to dangerous conditions. Dissatisfied crew members become liability rather than asset for expedition success. Your position in crew debates about expedition continuation involves balancing historical knowledge about ultimate success against immediate survival concerns that affect real people who don't know they're participating in world-changing discoveries. The crew's frustration with Columbus' leadership and navigation decisions escalates into serious discussions about removing him from command through methods that range from formal complaints to informal maritime justice that could involve permanently resolving the leadership problem through oceanic disposal. The mutiny planning involves experienced sailors who understand ship operations and feel qualified to navigate the return journey to Spain without Columbus's guidance. Their confidence is based on practical maritime experience that may be more reliable than Columbus's theoretical navigation calculations for getting home safely. The legal and practical complications of mutiny include questions about royal authority, expedition financing, and consequences that mutineers would face upon return to Spain if they remove a royally appointed expedition leader without clear justification that Spanish authorities would accept. Here's where maritime law meets practical survival in ways that could affect everyone's fate. Mutiny against royally appointed commanders constitutes treason that carries death penalties for participants, but continuing to follow commands that seem likely to kill everyone could also be considered suicide rather than loyal service to royal authority. The technical challenges of navigation without Columbus include uncertainty about his private charts, calculation methods, and destination knowledge that might be necessary for successful return to European ports. Removing Columbus could eliminate essential navigation information. Crew unity during mutiny planning reveals social divisions, loyalty conflicts, and leadership alternatives that affect the expedition's ability to function as coordinated unit regardless of who maintains formal command authority. Your role in mutiny discussions involves moral calculations about supporting crew survival against historical significance, while navigating social dynamics that could affect your own safety regardless of the outcome. The decision about whether to support potential mutiny against Columbus creates personal moral conflicts that involve balancing crew survival against royal authority, immediate safety against long-term consequence, and practical concerns against loyalty obligations that define your role as expedition member. The arguments for supporting mutiny include genuine concerns about expedition leadership, navigation competence, and supply management that affect everyone's survival chance. Columbus's decisions increasingly seem based on optimistic speculation rather than practical seamanship that experienced sailors consider reliable. The arguments for maintaining loyalty include respect for royal authority, recognition of Columbus's navigation experience, and awareness that mutiny creates leadership uncertainties that could be more dangerous than continuing under current command structure despite its obvious problem. But the loyalty dilemma involves considerations that go beyond immediate expedition politics. The consequences of mutiny participation could affect your legal status, social standing, and personal safety both during the expedition and after return to Spain, where royal authorities would investigate any command changes and punish participants in unauthorized leadership removal. The effectiveness of alternative leadership depends on navigation skills, crew management abilities, and decision-making competence of potential replacement commanders who may or may not be better qualified than Columbus for managing expedition challenge. The timing of mutiny decisions affects their success and consequences, since waiting too long could eliminate return options, while acting too early could remove competent leadership before alternatives prove themselves capable of managing expedition responsibility. Your modern knowledge about expedition outcomes provides perspective on leadership decisions that crew members can't access, but using this knowledge to influence mutiny decisions could change historical events in ways that affect global development and cultural exchange. The expedition's food management crisis develops gradually as daily consumption rates exceed planned allocations, while the voyage duration extends far beyond Columbus's original estimates, creating a survival situation where caloric needs must be balanced against remaining supplies and uncertain arrival times at resupply locations. Inventory assessments reveal that hardtack supplies, preserved meat stocks, and other essential foods are being consumed faster than anticipated due to extended voyage duration, higher caloric needs during rough weather, and spoilage rates that exceed preservation estimates. Food scarcity affects everyone, but becomes critical for maintaining work capacity needed for ship operations. Rationing decisions involve complex calculations about crew needs, essential personnel priorities, and reserve management that could determine whether the expedition reaches land with sufficient crew strength to handle arrival procedures, or arrives with weakened personnel who can't effectively manage landing operations. But food shortages at sea create survival challenges that go beyond simple hunger. Malnutrition affects cognitive function, physical strength, and decision-making abilities that are essential for navigation, ship maintenance, and emergency response during conditions that require maximum crew competence for survival. Food distribution hierarchies reflect ship social structure as officers, essential personnel, and experienced sailors receive priority allocations, while ordinary crew members accept reduced rations that may not provide adequate nutrition for physical labor requirements. The psychological stress of food scarcity affects crew morale, work performance, and social relationships as hunger becomes constant background concern that influences all other aspects of expedition life and decision-making. Emergency food conservation measures include reducing daily rations, eliminating non-essential consumption, and identifying alternative nutrition sources that might supplement remaining supplies without compromising keeping crew health below levels needed for basic survival. The crew's desperate attempts to supplement declining food supplies through fishing reveal that catching ocean fish from a moving ship requires specialized equipment, techniques, and knowledge that most expedition members don't possess, while success rates remain unpredictable and insufficient for feeding 30 crew members. Fishing equipment aboard the ship includes basic hooks, lines, and nets that are designed for coastal fishing rather than deep ocean angling, and the techniques that work in European waters may not be effective in Atlantic oceanic conditions where fish species, behavior patterns, and feeding schedules differ from familiar coastal environment. The time and labor investment required for fishing activities competes with essential ship maintenance, navigation duties, and other survival tasks that require crew attention, creating resource allocation decisions about whether fishing efforts justify the labor costs when success rates remain uncertain. Here's where maritime survival meets the reality of oceanic food chains and fishing challenges. Ocean fish populations in unexplored Atlantic waters include species that expedition members don't recognize, can't identify as safe for consumption, and may not be effectively caught using European fishing techniques and equipment designed for different maritime environments. Weather conditions that make fishing possible often don't coincide with conditions that make fishing productive, since calm seas needed for effective angling may not provide the water movement and surface activity that attract fish to areas where they can be caught. The processing and preservation of any successfully caught fish requires fresh water for cleaning, salt for preservation, and cooking fuel for preparation, all resources that are already scarce and competed for by other essential expedition needs. Success rates for expedition fishing remain disappointingly low, as crew members struggle with unfamiliar equipment, unknown fish behavior, and oceanic conditions that make consistent food acquisition through fishing unrealistic for meeting expedition nutritional needs. The progression of food scarcity creates conditions where crew members begin discussing survival options that include consuming expedition members who die from natural causes, disease, or accident, representing a moral and practical crisis that tests individual ethics against group survival needs. The legal and religious implications of cannibalism conflict with practical survival considerations, as crew members debate whether consuming human flesh to prevent starvation constitutes necessary survival behavior or represents moral transgression that could damn participants regardless of the survival justifications involved. Cultural attitudes toward cannibalism vary among crew members based on religious backgrounds, regional traditions, and personal moral framework, creating social tensions as different ethical systems produce conflicting conclusions about acceptable survival behavior during life-threatening circumstances. But cannibalism discussions reveal the extremity of conditions that push human behavior beyond normal moral boundaries. The medical knowledge available to expedition members includes uncertainty about health risks associated with consuming human flesh, disease transmission possibilities, and nutritional value of human tissue compared to other potential food sources that might be available. Social relationships become strained as crew members evaluate each other as potential food sources while maintaining working relationships needed for ship operations and group survival during conditions that require continued cooperation despite underlying tension. The psychological impact of considering cannibalism affects crew morale, individual mental health, and group cohesion, as people confront moral decisions that challenge fundamental assumptions about human dignity and ethical behavior during survival emergency. Religious counseling from expedition clergy attempts to provide moral guidance about survival ethics while balancing theological principles against practical realities that may require choosing between different types of moral compromise for maintaining life. Your first encounter with large marine life in unexplored Atlantic waters creates terror and confusion as crew members attempt to identify massive underwater movements that could represent unknown sea creatures, dangerous marine life, or the legendary monsters that medieval maps use to mark dangerous oceanic regions. The sighting begins when multiple crew members observe large disturbances in the water near the ship, including what appears to be enormous tentacles, massive underwater shadow, and surface disturbances that suggest creatures of unprecedented size moving beneath the vessel in ways that threaten ship safety. Medieval maritime mythology includes detailed descriptions of sea monsters that attack ships, drag vessels underwater, and consume, providing explanatory framework for oceanic phenomena that sailors can't otherwise understand through available knowledge about marine biology and ocean ecology. But identifying large marine life involves challenges that could affect expedition survival and decision-making. The absence of accurate knowledge about Atlantic marine species means that crew members interpret unfamiliar sea life through frameworks of existing mythology and superstition rather than biological understanding that could provide accurate threat assessment. Large marine animals could present genuine dangers to wooden ships through collision damage, aggressive behavior, or territorial responses that pose real threats to expedition safety, while also representing natural phenomena rather than supernatural threat. The psychological impact of potential sea monster encounters affects crew morale, navigation decisions, and willingness to continue sailing through oceanic regions that seem populated by creatures that exceed human ability to understand or control. Your modern knowledge of marine biology helps you recognize that observed phenomena probably represent whales, large fish schools, or other natural oceanic life, but explaining these concepts requires scientific knowledge that won't be developed for centuries. The crew's excitement about potential mermaid sightings in tropical waters reveals how limited knowledge about marine life combines with psychological stress and cultural expectations to create misidentification of natural phenomena as supernatural encounters that could have religious and practical implications for expedition success. The mermaid reports begin when crew members observe what appear to be human-like figures in distant waters, displaying behavior that suggests intelligence and possible communication attempts while exhibiting physical characteristics that combine human and fish-like features, according to classical descriptions of marine humanoid. Medieval European culture includes extensive mermaid mythology that portrays these creatures as either benevolent guides who help lost sailors, or dangerous temptresses who lure ships to destruction, creating interpretive frameworks that could influence navigation decisions and crew behavior based on perceived supernatural encounters. Here's where marine biology meets mythology in ways that affect practical expedition decisions. The actual marine life responsible for mermaid sightings probably includes manatees, dugongs, or other aquatic mammals, whose behavior and appearance could be interpreted as humanoid when observed from distance, under conditions that limit clear observation and accurate species identification. The crew's emotional response to potential mermaid contact includes excitement about supernatural encounters, hope for guidance from benevolent marine spirits, and fear about possible threats from creatures whose intentions and capabilities remain unknown, and potentially dangerous. Religious implications of mermaid encounters involve theological questions about the spiritual status of non-human intelligent creatures, and whether contact with such beings represents divine guidance, demonic temptation, or natural phenomena that doesn't require religious interpretation. Your modern understanding of marine mammals provides rational explanations for observed phenomena, but sharing this knowledge requires introducing biological concepts that conflict with established cultural frameworks and could mark you as either heretical or suspiciously knowledgeable about supernatural subjects. The expedition's progress into oceanic regions that exceed medieval geographical knowledge creates growing anxiety about sailing beyond the known world into areas where classical authorities suggested the ocean might end in waterfalls, abyssal depth, or other geographical features that could destroy ships and kill crews. Medieval maps include warnings about oceanic edges, boiling seas, and geographical boundaries, where normal navigation rules might not apply, and where ships could encounter conditions that exceed human ability to survive or understand through available scientific and geographical knowledge. The crew's concerns about world edges reflect educational backgrounds that combine classical geographical authorities with practical maritime experience that doesn't extend to transoceanic distances, creating uncertainty about whether current navigation theories apply to unexplored oceanic regions. But geographical anxiety affects navigation decisions and crew confidence in ways that could determine expedition success or failure. The possibility of encountering oceanic edges or geographical boundaries that exceed ship capabilities affects willingness to continue sailing into unknown waters when alternative options like returning to European ports remain available but become less feasible as distances increase. Columbus's geographical theories about ocean sizes and world configuration require crew members to trust calculations that contradict established authorities and common sense assumptions about oceanic distances and global geography, creating confidence challenges for expedition leadership. The psychological stress of sailing into potentially impossible geographical conditions affects crew performance, decision-making, and willingness to follow orders that could lead to destruction if Columbus's geographical theories prove incorrect or incomplete. Your modern knowledge of global geography provides reassurance about oceanic continuity and planetary structure, but explaining spherical Earth concepts requires introducing scientific knowledge that conflicts with established medieval cosmology and could raise questions about the source
source of your unusual geographical expertise.
The onset of scurvy among crew members reveals the devastating effects of vitamin C deficiency during extended voyages without fresh fruits and vegetables, and you witness the progression of a disease that systematically destroys human health through symptoms that medieval medicine can't effectively understand or treat. The early symptoms of scurvy include fatigue, joint pain, and minor bleeding that crew members initially attribute to normal effects of maritime labor and harsh living conditions. But the symptoms progressively worsen into serious health problems that threaten individual survival and expedition effectiveness. Advanced scurvy symptoms include tooth loss, internal bleeding, wound healing failure, and psychological effects that can render affected crew members unable to perform essential ship duties while requiring care and resources that strain expedition medical capabilities and food supplies. But scurvy represents more than just individual health problems. It threatens expedition survival through crew incapacitation. The medical knowledge available to expedition members includes herbal remedies and religious treatments that have no effect on vitamin deficiency diseases, leaving crews helpless to prevent or treat conditions that could systematically eliminate effective personnel. Multiple crew members developing scurvy simultaneously creates cascading problems, as healthy personnel must compensate for increasing numbers of incapacitated workers while managing their own health challenges and essential ship operations that require full crew participation. The psychological impact of watching shipmates develop progressive illness that appears incurable affects crew morale and individual fear about personal health prospects during remaining voyage duration and potential return journey requirement. Your modern knowledge of nutrition and vitamin deficiency provides understanding of scurvy causes and potential treatments, but effective treatment requires fresh vitamin C sources that aren't available during oceanic voyages using 15th century preservation technology. The death of your first crew member from disease creates immediate practical and emotional challenges, as the expedition must manage body disposal, crew morale and operational adjustments, while continuing essential navigation and ship maintenance activities that determine everyone's survival chances. Maritime funeral procedures involve wrapping the deceased in available canvas or clothing, adding weight to ensure the body sinks properly, and conducting religious services that provide spiritual comfort while acknowledging the practical necessity of oceanic burial rather than traditional interment. The emotional impact on remaining crew members includes grief for lost shipmates, increased awareness of personal mortality, and anxiety about expedition conditions that could kill additional personnel before reaching land or return destinations that offer medical care and better living conditions. Here's where maritime death creates practical problems that affect expedition operations and crew psychology. The loss of experienced crew members reduces expedition capability for essential tasks while redistributing workloads among remaining personnel who may not possess the specialized skills or knowledge that deceased members contributed to group survival effort. Body disposal procedures require crew time, materials, and emotional energy during conditions that demand maximum focus on navigation and survival activities, creating resource allocation conflicts between honoring the dead and maintaining expedition effectiveness. Religious considerations about proper burial conflict with practical necessities of oceanic disposal, while crew members worry about spiritual consequences of burial methods that don't conform to traditional religious requirements for Christian interment. The psychological adjustment to death as normal part of expedition life affects individual behavior, group relationships, and willingness to continue following leadership that may be responsible for conditions that killed shipmates through poor planning or inadequate preparation. The absence of qualified medical personnel creates pressure for crew members with any healing knowledge to provide medical care for sick and injured shipmates, and you find yourself attempting to treat conditions using limited supplies and medical knowledge that may be inadequate for serious health problems. Your medical supplies consist of basic herbs, bandages, and tools that were designed for treating minor injuries and common illnesses rather than serious diseases, nutritional deficiencies, and medical emergencies that could develop during extended oceanic voyages without access to professional medical care. Medieval medical theory combines classical authorities, religious explanation, and practical folk remedies in ways that provide treatment frameworks but may not address actual causes of illness or provide effective interventions for conditions that require modern medical knowledge and pharmaceutical treatment. But expedition medical care involves life and death decisions that require require making treatment choices with inadequate knowledge and limited resources. The absence of medical training means that treatment decisions are based on speculation, folk knowledge and religious faith rather than accurate understanding of disease processes, effective treatments and proper medical procedures that could improve patient outcome. Limited medical supplies must be allocated among multiple patients with different conditions while preserving resources for future medical emergencies that could affect additional crew members during remaining voyage duration and potential return journey requirements. The psychological pressure of making medical decisions that could save or kill shipmates affects individual stress levels and crew relationships as people evaluate medical competence and treatment outcomes that determine their confidence in available medical care. Your modern first aid knowledge provides some advantages in emergency treatment and basic medical care, but serious medical conditions require pharmaceutical treatments and medical procedures that aren't available during 15th century oceanic expedition. The psychological pressure of extended oceanic sailing creates conditions where crew members begin reporting land sightings that prove to be optical illusions, cloud formation, or wishful thinking that reflects the desperate need for reaching solid ground after weeks of uncertainty about navigation progress and arrival expectations. The first false land alarm creates enormous excitement and hope among crew members who have been anticipating landfall for weeks, followed by crushing disappointment when closer investigation reveals that the reported land consists of distant clouds that appeared solid when viewed through maritime atmospheric conditions that distort distant objects. Subsequent false alarms create psychological challenges as crew members struggle to balance hope for genuine land discoveries against skepticism that could cause them to dismiss actual land sightings when they finally occur, affecting the expedition's ability to recognize and respond to real navigation landmarks. But false land sightings reveal the psychological toll of extended oceanic sailing on crew mental health and decision-making. The desperation for landfall affects perception and judgment as crew members unconsciously interpret ambiguous visual information as confirmation of hoped-for discoveries rather than applying objective evaluation that could distinguish between genuine landmarks and optical illusion. Repeated false alarms affect crew morale and confidence in leadership as people question whether expedition navigation is accurate enough to predict landfall timing or whether Columbus's assurances about approaching land are based on reliable knowledge or optimistic speculation. The social dynamics of land reporting create pressure for crew members to confirm sightings that others claim to see while avoiding the embarrassment of reporting false discoveries that waste time and energy on fruitless investigation of non-existent landmarks. Your modern understanding of optical illusions and atmospheric effects helps you recognize likely causes of false sightings, but this knowledge must be balanced against the crew's psychological need for hope and positive reinforcement during challenging conditions. Challenges created by oceanic atmospheric conditions result in frequent confusion between distant cloud formations and actual islands, as crew members struggle to distinguish between weather phenomena and geographical features when observed from maritime distances that make precise identification difficult. Cloud formations over oceanic waters can create visual appearances that strongly resemble distant islands, mountain ranges, and coastal features when viewed through atmospheric conditions that affect light refraction, distance perception, and visual clarity in ways that fool experienced navigators and professional sailors. The identification techniques available to 15th century navigators include visual observation methods that depend on weather conditions, lighting quality, and distance factors that change throughout the day while providing limited ability to confirm initial sightings through alternative verification methods. Here's where atmospheric physics meets navigation needs in ways that affect expedition decision-making. The time and resources invested in investigating potential land sightings must be balanced against navigation priorities and expedition scheduling that assume efficient progress toward confirmed destinations, rather than delays caused by pursuing false landmarks that waste time and resources. Weather conditions that create cloud illusions often coincide with atmospheric effects that make accurate visual navigation more difficult while reducing the reliability of other navigation methods that depend on clear visibility and stable atmospheric conditions. The crew's expertise in distinguishing between clouds and land varies significantly depending on individual experience, visual acuity, and psychological state that affects objective assessment of distant objects under conditions that challenge even experienced maritime observers. Your modern understanding of meteorology and atmospheric optics provides advantages in evaluating
estimating potential land sightings, but sharing this knowledge requires explaining scientific concepts that might seem suspiciously advanced for someone with your apparent background and education. The expedition's land sighting reward system creates perverse incentives, as crew members consider making false land reports in hopes of claiming promised compensation while balancing potential rewards against consequences of providing false information that wastes expedition time and resource. Columbus's promise of financial rewards for the first confirmed land sighting establishes competitive pressure among crew members who understand that successful land discovery could provide economic benefits that significantly exceed normal expedition wages and compensation for maritime service. The verification process for land sightings involves investigation procedures that require time, navigation changes, and resource allocation decisions that affect expedition progress while testing the accuracy of reported discoveries through methods that may not definitively confirm or disprove initial observation. But the reward system creates moral hazards that could affect expedition effectiveness and crew relationships. The temptation to report false land sightings increases as voyage duration extends beyond expected timeframes, while crew members face declining supplies and uncertain arrival prospects that make reward incentives more attractive relative to survival concern. False reporting risks include potential punishment for providing misleading information, loss of credibility for future legitimate sightings, and contribution to expedition delays that could affect everyone's survival chances through resource waste and navigation inefficiency. The social dynamics of competitive land spotting create tensions among crew members who evaluate each other's reports while protecting their own opportunities for reward collection and recognition as successful contributors to expedition navigation progress. Your position in the reward competition involves ethical considerations about participating in systems that might encourage false reporting while balancing personal economic interests against expedition effectiveness and crew welfare.
The genuine land sighting that finally ends weeks of oceanic uncertainty occurs when Rodrigo de Triana spots actual land on the horizon at dawn on October 2, creating excitement and relief that transforms expedition mood from desperate hope to triumphant celebration. As crew members realize they've successfully crossed the Atlantic Ocean, San Salvador Island appears as a dark line on the horizon that gradually resolves into recognizable geographical features including trees, beaches, and topographical variations that confirm this sighting represents actual land rather than another atmospheric illusion or cloud formation that has disappointed the crew during previous false alarms. The approach to San Salvador reveals island characteristics that don't match Columbus's expectations for Asian coastal features, but the land represents successful completion of transoceanic navigation that proves European ships can reach new territories through western sailing routes previously considered impossible or suicidal. This is where geographical theory meets reality in ways that will change human understanding of world geography. The island's appearance contradicts classical descriptions of Asian coastlines and doesn't include the cities, harbors, and commercial development that Columbus expected to find based on Marco Polo's accounts and other authorities who described Asian civilization and trade opportunities. The crew's excitement about reaching land combines relief about survival with confusion about geographical location, as the discovered territory doesn't match any known descriptions of Asian regions or territories that expedition planning anticipated encountering during the voyage. Navigation calculations suggest that the expedition should have reached Asian waters, but the land characteristics indicate either significant errors in geographical knowledge or the discovery of previously unknown territories that don't appear on available maps or classical authorities. Your modern knowledge of global geography provides understanding that the expedition has reached the Caribbean islands rather than Asia, but explaining this requires introducing concepts about continental distribution and oceanic distances that conflict with established 15th century geographical theories. Columbus's immediate interpretation of land discovery involves the confident declaration that the expedition has successfully reached the Indies and established direct western routes to Asian territories, demonstrating how preconceived geographical theories can override observational evidence that contradicts expected outcomes. The Admiral's conviction that San Salvador represents an Indian Ocean island reflects his investment in geographical calculations that required Asian landfall in this location, making alternative interpretations of the discovery psychologically and professionally unacceptable despite evidence that contradicts Asian identification. Columbus's geographical reasoning for Indian identification includes distance calculations, navigation estimates, and theoretical frameworks that make Asian discovery seem logically inevitable, while evidence of unfamiliar plants, animals, and human populations is interpreted as regional variations within Asian territorial diversity. Here's where Columbus demonstrates both the power and the limitations of theoretical conviction in the face of contradictory evidence. The naming of encountered peoples as Indians establishes linguistic and conceptual frameworks that will persist for centuries despite immediate evidence. These populations don't resemble Asian Indians described in available travel accounts and commercial reports from established Asian trade routes. Columbus's insistence on Asian identification affects expedition goals, indigenous contact protocol, and Spanish colonial policy as royal authorities base territorial claims and administrative decisions on geographical assumptions that fundamentally misunderstand the nature and significance of the discovered territory. The crew's acceptance of Columbus's geographical interpretation varies depending on individual knowledge and experience, with some sailors accepting authoritative explanations while others privately question whether observed land characteristics match descriptions of Asian territories from reliable sources. Your modern geographical knowledge creates awareness that Columbus's mistake will have profound historical consequences for indigenous populations, European expansion, and global development, but correcting the error requires challenging authority and introducing knowledge that can't be explained through available 15th century information sources. The initial encounter between European expedition members and indigenous Taino people represents one of history's most significant cultural meetings, as two completely different human civilizations establish contact without shared languages, cultural framework, or mutual understanding of each other's origins, intentions, or capabilities. The Taino people who approach the Spanish ships demonstrate curiosity, intelligence, and peaceful intentions as they investigate strange vessels that obviously come from unknown origins, while displaying technology, clothing, and physical characteristics that don't match any familiar human populations. The communication challenges involve attempting to establish basic understanding between peoples who don't share vocabulary, cultural concepts, or social frameworks for interpreting each other's behavior, creating interactions that depend entirely on gestures, demonstrations, and careful observation of responses to various contact attempts. But first contact involves complexities that neither European nor indigenous participants fully understand. The indigenous perspective on European contact includes wonder about strange visitors who possess unknown technologies, unusual physical characteristics, and mysterious origins that could represent supernatural encounters, distant human population, or phenomena that require entirely new interpretive framework. European interpretations of indigenous contact reflect cultural assumptions about civilization, technology, and social organization that lead to conclusions about indigenous capabilities and social development that may not accurately reflect Taino society's actual complexity and achievement. The peaceful nature of initial contact creates opportunities for cultural exchange, mutual learning, and cooperative relationships, but also establishes patterns of interaction that could develop into exploitation, misunderstanding, or conflict depending on subsequent decisions by both European and indigenous participants. Your modern understanding of cultural anthropology and historical consequences of European indigenous contact provides perspective on the significance of these interactions, but participating requires navigating between cultural sensitivity and historical limitations of 15th century European thinking about cultural differences and human diversity. The Spanish expedition's priorities immediately shift toward locating gold sources when indigenous people display small gold ornaments that suggest the presence of precious metals that could justify expedition expenses and fulfill royal expectations for profitable discoveries that provide economic returns on investment in transoceanic exploration. Columbus's intense focus on gold acquisition reflects royal mandates that require expedition profitability through treasure discovery, territorial claims, or trade opportunities that compensate Spanish authorities for financing risky oceanic voyages that could easily result in total loss without any return on investment. The indigenous people's casual attitude toward gold ownership contrasts dramatically with European valuations of precious metal, creating opportunities for exchange relationships that heavily favor Spanish interests, while indigenous participants may not understand the long-term economic and political implications of their trading decision. But the gold search establishes patterns of European indigenous interaction that will define colonial relationships. Spanish questioning about gold sources requires communication methods that transcend language barriers, while potentially creating unrealistic indigenous expectations, European interests, and intentions that could affect future relationships between expanding Spanish presence and established indigenous communities. The economic pressure to locate substantial gold deposits affects expedition planning, indigenous contact protocol, and territorial exploration strategies as Spanish authorities evaluate discovered lands primarily through their potential for precious metal extraction rather than agricultural, strategic, or cultural value. Indigenous knowledge about gold
world sources includes geological understanding and regional trade networks that could provide valuable information for Spanish exploration, but sharing this knowledge could facilitate European expansion that ultimately threatens indigenous political independence and cultural autonomy. Your modern awareness of colonial exploitation patterns helps you recognize the problematic nature of gold-focused contact, but participating in historically significant interactions requires balancing ethical concerns against accurate historical representation of 15th century European attitudes and objectives. The communication challenges between Spanish expedition members and Taino people create daily frustrations and misunderstandings as both groups attempt to share information, negotiate agreement, and establish social relationships without shared vocabulary or cultural frameworks for interpreting each other's intentions and meanings. Basic concept communication requires elaborate gesture systems, drawing demonstration, repetitive interactions that gradually build limited vocabulary for essential topics like food, water, directions, and trade items, while leaving complex ideas and cultural concepts completely inaccessible through available communication methods. The learning process for both European and indigenous participants involves memorizing foreign sounds, associating gestures with meanings, and developing hybrid communication systems that combine elements from both cultures while remaining inadequate for sophisticated discussions about politics, religion, or social organization. Here's where language barriers reveal the complexity of cross-cultural communication and understanding. Misunderstandings arising from inadequate communication include mistaken agreements, confused negotiations, and misinterpreted social signals that could escalate into conflicts or create false expectations about relationships between Spanish and indigenous communities. The translation challenges for abstract concepts like property ownership, political authority, and religious beliefs create situations where European and indigenous participants think they understand each other, while actually operating according to completely different assumptions about social relationships and cultural obligation. Cultural differences in communication styles include varying approaches to directness, formality, and social hierarchy that affect interpretation of messages even when basic vocabulary is successfully communicated, creating additional layers of potential misunderstanding beyond simple language differences. Your modern foreign language experience provides some advantages in recognizing communication patterns and developing basic vocabulary, but effective cross-cultural communication requires understanding cultural contexts and social frameworks that take extended exposure and careful observation to develop accurate. The development of Spanish indigenous relationships involves complex negotiations between cooperation and conflict, as both groups evaluate each other's intentions, capability, and potential threats while establishing social patterns that could determine whether contact leads to mutual benefit or destructive confrontation. Initial peaceful interactions include gift exchanges, shared meals, and collaborative activities that demonstrate goodwill, while allowing both groups to assess each other's social organization, technological capabilities, and potential for beneficial relationships that serve mutual interest. The potential for hostile relations emerges from cultural misunderstandings, resource competition, compatible social expectations, as European colonial objectives conflict with indigenous territorial sovereignty and political independence in ways that may be impossible to resolve through peaceful negotiation. But the trajectory toward peaceful or hostile relations depends on decisions and behavior patterns that are being established during these early contact experiences. Spanish military advantages include advanced weapons and tactical experience that could enable conquest of indigenous populations, but successful colonization requires indigenous cooperation for food production, geographical knowledge, and labor assistance that makes hostile relations potentially counterproductive. Indigenous political responses to European contact include diplomatic strategies, defensive preparations, and alliance considerations that reflect sophisticated understanding of international relationships and political consequences of different approaches to managing foreign contact and territorial pressure. The religious and cultural implications of sustained contact include potential conversion pressures, social disruption, and cultural change that could benefit or harm indigenous communities, depending on the specific nature of relationships that develop between Spanish and indigenous authority. Your modern understanding of colonial history provides awareness of how these early relationships will develop into larger patterns of exploitation and resistance, but your current participation involves immediate decisions about individual behavior that contributes to establishing these historical patterns.
Columbus's formal territorial claims for the Spanish crown involve legal ceremonies that establish European ownership of discovered lands through procedures that completely ignore indigenous political sovereignty, while creating foundations for Spanish colonial administration and territorial expansion throughout the Caribbean region. The legal framework for territorial appropriation includes royal authority that grants Columbus power to claim any discovered lands for Spanish sovereignty, establish colonial governments, and allocate territorial rights to Spanish settlers without requiring indigenous consent or recognition of existing political relationships. The ceremony of territorial claiming involves planting Spanish flags, conducting religious services, and creating written documentation that establishes legal precedents for Spanish ownership, while indigenous witnesses observe procedures that will dramatically affect their political status and territorial rights without their understanding or participation. Here's where European legal concepts meet indigenous political reality in ways that will reshape the Americas. Spanish territorial law assumes that uninhabited or non-Christian lands can be legitimately claimed through discovery and formal possession procedure, while indigenous political systems that govern territorial relationships and land use rights are dismissed as irrelevant to legitimate sovereignty claims. The documentation of territorial claims creates legal foundations for Spanish colonial expansion, religious conversion requirement, and economic exploitation that will affect indigenous populations throughout the Americas, while providing European justification for policies that prioritize Spanish interests over indigenous rights. Religious justifications for territorial appropriation include papal authority that grants Christian nations rights to claim and govern non-Christian territories for the purpose of spreading Christianity and advancing European civilization among populations considered culturally and spiritually inferior. Your modern understanding of indigenous rights and international law makes Spanish territorial claiming seem obviously unjust, but participating in these historically significant ceremonies requires understanding how 15th century European thinking justified actions that contemporary perspectives consider unethical and illegal. The initial Spanish consideration of indigenous people as potential slave labor represents the beginning of systematic exploitation that will define European indigenous relationships throughout the colonial period, while establishing economic patterns that prioritize Spanish wealth accumulation over indigenous human rights and cultural survival. Columbus's letters to Spanish authorities describe indigenous people as suitable for forced labor due to their perceived docility, physical capabilities, and lack of advanced weapons that could resist Spanish control, revealing European attitudes that treat indigenous populations as economic resources rather than independent political entities. The legal justifications for enslaving indigenous people include religious arguments about converting non-Christians to Christianity through forced labor, political theories about Spanish sovereignty over conquered territories, and economic reasoning about utilizing available labor resources for colonial development and Spanish enrichment. But the slave trade represents systematic dehumanization that will affect millions of people across centuries of colonial exploitation. The transportation of indigenous slaves to European markets involves conditions that cause massive mortality rates, while generating profits that finance continued colonial expansion and provide economic incentives for increasing the scale and intensity of slave-gathering expeditions. Religious and legal debates about indigenous slavery include theological questions about whether indigenous people possess souls that deserve Christian salvation, and legal discussions about the extent of Spanish authority over conquered populations and territorial resources. Economic development of Caribbean colonies depends increasingly on forced labor systems that require continuous supplies of enslaved workers, while generating wealth that supports Spanish imperial expansion and European economic development at enormous human cost. Your modern understanding of human rights and the historical consequences of slavery makes participation in these early slave trade discussions morally troubling, but accurately representing historical events requires acknowledging how 15th century European thinking justified actions that contemporary ethics consider fundamentally wrong. The unintentional introduction of European diseases to indigenous populations begins immediately upon contact, as expedition members carry pathogens that will prove devastating to peoples who lack immunity to European disease environment, creating demographic catastrophes that will reshape the Americas more dramatically than military conquest or political control. Smallpox, typhus, measles, and other diseases that pose manageable health challenges for Europeans who have developed immunities through generational exposure become mass killers among indigenous populations who have no previous exposure to these pathogens and no cultural knowledge about treatment or prevention. The epidemic consequences of disease introduction include population declines that could reach 90% mortality rates in some indigenous communities, creating social collapse that eliminates political resistance to European expansion while destroying cultural knowledge and social institutions that took centuries to develop. Here's where biological warfare occurs without European awareness or intention, but with devastating effectiveness.
The timing of disease outbreaks often coincides with periods of increased European indigenous contact, creating false impressions that indigenous deaths result from divine punishment, cultural inferiority, or natural selection rather than biological phenomena that could affect any population lacking appropriate immunities. Medical knowledge available to both European and indigenous participants provides no understanding of disease transmission, immunity development, or effective treatment methods for epidemic diseases, leaving communities helpless to prevent or manage health crises that systematically destroy social organization. Cultural responses to epidemic diseases include religious explanations, social disruption, and political changes that affect indigenous capacity for resistance to European expansion, while creating conditions that facilitate colonial control through indigenous demographic collapse and social fragmentation. Your modern understanding of epidemiology provides awareness of disease transmission processes and immunity requirements, but effective intervention would require medical knowledge and pharmaceutical resources that won't be available for centuries, while potentially altering historical development in ways that affect global cultural evolution. Columbus's decision to initiate the return voyage to Spain represents both successful completion of transoceanic exploration and the beginning of equally dangerous navigation challenges, as the expedition must cross Atlantic waters using supplies and crew that have been depleted and damaged by months of oceanic sailing and exploration activities. The timing of departure involves balancing expedition objectives against practical limitations including declining supplies, crew health problems, and weather considerations that affect the feasibility of return navigation, while carrying sufficient evidence of discovery success to satisfy royal expectations and justify continued exploration funding. Preparation for return voyage includes loading indigenous people, gold sample, exotic plants, and other evidence of successful discovery while managing crew expectations about navigation challenges and survival prospects during another extended oceanic crossing that could prove more dangerous than the original westward journey. But the return voyage involves navigation challenges that exceed those of the original expedition. The prevailing wind patterns that facilitated westward Atlantic crossing don't provide equivalent assistance for eastward return navigation, requiring different sailing strategies and potentially longer voyage duration, while using equipment and supplies that are already compromised by extended oceanic use. Crew health conditions include scurvy, malnutrition, and various illnesses that reduce expedition capability for handling emergency situations and performing essential ship operations during return navigation that demands maximum crew performance for survival. Navigation accuracy for return voyage depends on Columbus's ability to retrace oceanic routes using dead reckoning calculations that may have accumulated significant errors during outbound navigation, while lacking reliable landmarks or verification methods for confirming position and course correction. Your modern knowledge of Atlantic weather patterns and navigation principles provides understanding of return voyage challenges, but effective assistance requires technical knowledge about seamanship and navigation that takes years of practical experience to develop, while potentially introducing anachronistic concepts that don't fit 15th century maritime technology. Systems that test the expedition's reduced capacity for emergency response while threatening ship integrity and crew survival through weather conditions that exceed those experienced during the outbound journey when equipment and personnel were in better condition. Storm damage during return navigation affects ship speed, maneuverability, and structural integrity while reducing expedition resources for emergency repairs and crew care during conditions that require maximum performance from equipment and personnel that are already operating near failure limit. The psychological stress of surviving storms while weakened by extended oceanic sailing affects crew performance and decision-making during critical periods when survival depends on coordinated emergency response and effective crisis management by people who are physically and mentally exhausted. Here's where the return voyage reveals whether the expedition has sufficient resources and capability to complete transoceanic navigation successfully. Emergency procedures during return voyage storms require using depleted supplies and damaged equipment, while managing crew members who may be too weak or sick to perform essential duties during conditions that demand maximum physical and mental performance. Navigation during storm conditions affects course accuracy and position certainty while potentially driving the expedition off course in ways that could extend voyage duration beyond available supply limits or create additional survival challenges when resources are already inadequate. Survival probability navigability calculations involve assessing remaining food and water supplies against estimated navigation requirements while factoring in potential delays from weather, navigation error, and equipment failures that could affect expedition survival during final approach to European waters. Your modern weather knowledge provides some advantages for storm prediction and emergency preparation, but effective storm survival requires maritime skills and seamanship experience that take years to develop through direct exposure to oceanic conditions and emergency situations. The approaching completion of successful transoceanic exploration creates awareness that expedition members have participated in historically significant events that will reshape human understanding of global geography and create new possibilities for cultural exchange, territorial expansion, and economic development. Columbus's preparation of official reports for Spanish authorities involves documenting discoveries, describing indigenous population, and evaluating territorial potential while creating narrative frameworks that support continued exploration funding and Spanish colonial expansion in discovered regions. The crew's understanding of their historical participation varies depending on education and awareness, with some members recognizing the significance of successful transoceanic navigation while others focus primarily on personal survival and completion of contractual obligations to expedition leadership. But the historical significance of successful Atlantic crossing extends far beyond immediate expedition objectives. The proof that European ships can successfully navigate transoceanic distances opens possibilities for global exploration, cultural content, territorial expansion that will affect human development for centuries while establishing patterns of interaction between European and non-European civilizations. Documentation of indigenous populations, territorial characteristics, and navigation routes provides information that will support future exploration while establishing European knowledge bases about global geography and human diversity that influence subsequent colonial policies and cultural development. Religious implications of discovering new populations include theological questions about Christianity's global mission, indigenous spiritual status, and European obligations for spreading Christian civilization among peoples who were previously unknown to European religious authority. Your modern perspective on historical significance provides understanding of how these events will influence global development, cultural evolution, and human relationship. But your participation as expedition member involves immediate survival concerns and practical challenges rather than abstract historical analysis.
After surviving the complete transoceanic voyage from Spain to the Caribbean and back, you've successfully participated in one of history's most significant expeditions, while adapting to maritime conditions that challenge every aspect of modern life and thinking. Your achievements include surviving oceanic navigation without modern safety equipment, adapting to 15th century ship conditions, contributing to historically significant discoveries, and maintaining effectiveness as crew member during conditions that would challenge professional sailors with years of maritime experience. The challenges you faced exceeded normal maritime difficulties and included extended oceanic sailing, cultural contact with indigenous populations, navigation through unknown waters, and survival during conditions that medieval people considered extremely dangerous and potentially fatal. Your modern background provided some advantages in logical thinking and problem solving, while creating challenges in adapting to social hierarchy, religious authority, and survival conditions that medieval people accepted as normal aspects of maritime life. The fundamental differences between contemporary and historical maritime culture required adaptation to different standards of safety, hygiene, and individual rights, while learning to function within social systems that prioritized group survival over personal comfort or preferences. Thanks for joining this epic voyage across the Atlantic with Columbus in 1492. Your survival demonstrates human adaptability while revealing how much our modern world depends on technologies and social systems that didn't exist during the age of exploration. Until next time, appreciate your GPS navigation, weather forecasts, and the fact that when you travel, you know where you're going and how to get there without relying on compass readings and prayers for divine guidance. May fair winds fill your sails, may your compass always point true, and may you never have to eat hardtack or share a hammock with a 15th century sailor who considers weekly bathing a luxury. The end.